Good afternoon, and thank you very, very much for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. I'll start my slides with a couple of introductory slides that tells you a little bit about Mars Innovation, the organization for which I work. The slides are, rather than being a shameless commercial for Mars Innovation, which they probably are, a context to tell you that I am living in the life, or I'm living the life of dealing with the same pain that you are with respect to helping early stage medical companies to succeed. So just to tell you a little bit about who Mars Innovation is, we basically leverage the Mars DD, that's the big Mars complex platform, and we have 16 member organizations that are a part of Mars Innovation. And what we are trying to do is to just leverage to help the good ideas from the lab, from people's heads, and move them into the commercial marketplace. So the 16 member organizations that we have are on the slide. They include the universities, teaching hospitals in the Greater Toronto Area, as well as Thunder Bay Regional Research Institute. So what's our mission and our vision? And this is really a segue into the rest of my talk. We work to integrate our members' discoveries and resources, recognizing that very often within organizations there are people who are working on similar problems, addressing or attempting to address similar needs, but they don't necessarily talk with one another. And so we have a unique position of looking into the pots that are cooking in 16 organizations and helping to introduce people to each other who might not otherwise know that they exist and are trying to solve the same problem. We also look at leveraging both government support and private sector support, and I'll touch on the funding story in a moment. And again, our vision is to transform the most promising technologies into profitable products and services. And I just want to dwell on the words technologies, products, and services. Too often, companies are founded based on a technology. And the reality is customers don't buy a technology. They either buy a service or a product. And so part of the challenge, one of the keys to success, is taking the technology and turning it into a product or service that addresses the needs of the marketplace. Just the very last few words. People are familiar perhaps with Mars DD, the big Mars we call it, and we're a little different than them. We happen to share the first or the part of the name, and that's only to confuse people. But basically, Mars Discovery District is focused on building the next generation of startups in Ontario. Mars Innovation services our member organizations and helps to move the technologies out of the lab, out of people's heads, and as I said, into the marketplace. And we leverage what goes on at the Mars group to assist us in doing that. So just sort of the flow, and this is not a surprise, it's quite consistent with what sees elsewhere. We take the ideas, the technologies, the innovations, we then try to assist those along either by funding, proof of principle development. We provide business advice, we provide intellectual property support, and then those will either be manifest as research partnerships, startups, which are the more exciting, and also as licensing opportunities. So on to the main part of what it is that you came here to hear, and that is what do early stage companies need to do in order to succeed? Well, clearly one of the things that is required, and this was touched on a little earlier, is a cost-effective, compelling technology, which is either a product or a device that meets real, growing global needs of the customers that have the capacity and willingness to pay. There are way too many products and solutions that people conceive of that don't necessarily meet anybody's need, and that's really a challenge. And part of that is to make sure, I think as was said a little earlier, that whatever these products are do respect the clinical workflow, especially in the medical device industry. If you are hoping to create, to cause, to drive a new paradigm in the way healthcare is provided, you are going to have some challenges. That is entirely possible if what you have is revolutionary and addresses a need that cannot otherwise be addressed, but do respect physician workflow. Don't try to change things. It's a pretty tough haul. The next thing, of course, that a company needs is a competitive, sustainable advantage. You've got to be differentiated from everybody else, and you have to be able to protect that differentiation. I think that was referred to as a franchise a little earlier. The other thing that you need is a team that's able to design, to build, to secure regulatory approval, and we'll touch on that again in a moment, and actually sell the products. Whether your people sell the products themselves or find channel partners remains to be seen, but you need to have the capacity to be able to get your products to market. And finally, and this is the touchy one all the time, the necessary funding to carry the program through to at least cash flow break even. Canada is kind of an interesting country. We go to the Olympics and we strive to win the bronze medal. We can't do that. We really need to be proud of what we do and what we have. And the reality is Canada is an incredibly innovative country. We fight well above our weight in the world in terms of scientific publications and citations. And so you can see I've circled two areas where you can compare Canada, with our rather small population to the rest of the world. We're okay. There's a lot of really good stuff being done in our institutions, meaning that there's a fertile target or fertile grounds for innovation. The other thing that I would point out is that in terms of innovation, Canada is 8th in medical devices and 7th in biopharma. Again, I'm not suggesting that we should be going for the bronze medal, but this is to say that, again, we ought to continue to try to do even better than we are, but this isn't such a bad place for cool stuff to be invented. So now we've got this backdrop with an amazing opportunity of tremendous innovation coming out of our companies, coming out of our academic institutions. How do we take those and turn them into successful companies in the marketplace? Well, as I said, there is a tremendous body of research excellence. What we really need to do is to move from the discovery phase through product development phase and ultimately into the global marketplace. And this isn't a trivial thing to do by any stretch of the imagination. And conferences like this are aimed at basically inspiring people to go out and do it, to learn something at each meeting that we attend, to learn something from each person to whom we speak, and to take that away and integrate it into what we do in order to be successful. But we need to take risks. Canadians are incredibly risk averse. We unfortunately, or fortunately as the case may be, are a heavily resource-based economy, and that has allowed us to prosper by being hewers of wood, drawers of water, and sellers of oil and energy. That's not going to sustain us going forward, so we really need to be aggressive and to take chances. Which, of course, is the segue into risk management. I spent many years as a project manager. I guess the last 2 years at Mars Innovation working with early stage companies and technologies and innovators. And before that, 8 years working directly with early stage startup companies. It's a bit of a repetitive statement, isn't it? You're either early stage or startup. So I tend to look at things from a risk management perspective. And so what companies need to do is they need to understand and plan for and manage the risks that they face. If you look at things from a risk management, risk mitigation perspective, you are part of the way there to addressing those particular risks. And I tend to look at risks as a three-legged milking stool. Execution risk, technology risk, and market risk. And any of you that have ever been on a farm and have milked a cow sitting on a three-legged milking stool knows what happens if one of the legs of the stool is weak. You have the risk of falling over and getting stuff all over you that you would not rather have. So what are the areas of market risk that one should be looking at? Clearly there's the competition, competitive positioning, and competitor response. The classic fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Many people know the old IBM story in the early days of competitors in the computer business, many of whom no longer exist, where the goal was fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Convince people that you can't go wrong buying IBM. One needs to look at the pricing model. Channels to market are critical. getting around these group buying organizations as best one can. There needs to be the right feature set, and I call that the minimum set for product launch. I'm an engineer, and so I can pick on engineers with total impunity. Engineers love to keep inventing. They love to keep improving. You need to focus on getting something that works and meets the customer's requirements and getting it out there quickly. Stop inventing, stop making it even better. You also need to look at macro trends and factors around you, global economy issues in that. And in some cases, government regulations or the lack thereof. I can think of several companies, early stage medical device, early stage software companies, that basically died while waiting for regulations to be passed that they thought would assure their success. Don't count on it. And then, of course, selling to the government is something of a challenge. Yes, if you can get a government contract, you are relatively assured to get paid. It can be large, it can be lucrative, but it is a real challenge. The government purchasing policies are unusual. I was looking for a non-pejorative phrase. One needs to look at the technology risk. That means the right product specifications. Don't come up with a list of product specifications that defy the laws of physics, that sound absolutely magnificent, but you couldn't possibly do it, or you couldn't possibly do it at the price points that the market is prepared to bear. People forget about the laws of physics, and they forget. They also don't realize that Mr. Murphy is very, very well and thriving out there, and somehow or other the features and functionality that you thought you had and that you were just dying to show a prospective customer at this first technology demo don't work. And so one needs to address that. For this particular meeting, I came with 3 USB flash drives in case one of them would malfunction and my presentation wouldn't be there, and I brought my laptop as well. Again, having had enough failures in my life, I realized the importance of testing, and making contingency plans, plan A, plan B, and in some cases plan C. The other technology risk, and I'll lump it here, is intellectual property. And it isn't just being able to protect what you've got through a patent, but also freedom to operate. Those of you that read the newspaper this morning probably noticed that Microsoft didn't necessarily have the freedom to operate that they thought they did in the area of XML in documents. Finally, the execution risk. People talk about real estate being location, location, location. I could not possibly stress more the importance of the team. It's all about people. There will be potholes in the road that will trip you up. And the extent to which you have the right team and the right skills mix, people with the right motivation, the right skills, you will succeed. I mean, there's a classic phrase in venture capital investing that says investors would rather invest in a team with a B technology than a B team with an A technology. Things will go wrong. The team is incredibly important. And in some cases, what this means is the founders, who are the doctors, the scientists, the engineers, need to bring in others around them who have the skills that they don't necessarily have, and recognize that they are the owners of the business and not necessarily having to be the CEO of the business. In some cases, there are obviously product development pitfalls. I'm aware of a couple of cases where there's been reliance on critical suppliers. We have a very sophisticated product that needs a particularly esoteric component that happens to come from one small company somewhere in the former Soviet Union. High risk. There are regulatory risks, and these are, in some cases, the risk that your product or service will not meet the regulatory requirements, or more likely that the regulatory process will bog you down and take you much longer than you otherwise anticipated, and you don't have the cash to survive. There are clinical trial challenges. Those of you that have attempted to organize clinical trials will be talking to researchers who say, oh yes, I have many, many, many samples of the types that you want, but they're not particularly well cataloged, and we may have used up some of them, and we're really not sure where the other ones are. Be very, very careful. Intellectual property, and I talked about that a moment ago, is both a sword and a shield. You need to protect yourself from others, but you can also use it as a competitive lever as the folks did in that company that defeated Microsoft finally. There's also focus. Too often, people try to do too much, and they try to do it too soon. Again, one needs to be sensitive and not do too little too late, but it's got to be focused. And this comes back to the feature set, and it comes back to, am I going to develop a suite of products, or am I going to be very focused on one or more? Then, of course, there's the challenges of product launch, bringing your product to market, getting it in front of the right people. And this is where key opinion leaders, technical or clinician champions are essential. Where you have a medical device that comes out of a medical institution that is championed by physicians in that institution, you've got a better chance than if it's a bunch of engineers and scientists sitting around and saying, you know, we could invent the most amazing new scalpel, retractor, clamp, and didn't bother to talk to any physicians along the way. And of course, to get key opinion leaders to endorse, to be the early adopters of your product, again, essential to get a position in the marketplace. And then, of course, there's that nasty thing called funding. Regrettably, it is extremely expensive to bring medical devices to market, and one needs the funding to be able to do that. And regrettably, in Canada, we have a financing gap. This is not something new that you're hearing from me for the first time today. I apologize for the size of some of the slides. The red line going down says risk, the green line going up says investment. And of course, in order to reduce the risk of your product, you need to invest money into developing it. Well, then there's also the issue of the, read that. Sales, silly me. One needs to get the product into market and to make the sales. And that tends to start late and is always a bigger challenge. So how does one address this particular financing gap? Well, you've got grants most of the time in academic institutions to do some of the initial work. One can find angel investors. Once one has something that is solid and a reasonable business plan and evidence of traction in the marketplace, it is conceivable to secure venture capital, although increasingly difficult to do in Canada, and then ultimately there are the public markets. But there is, regrettably, a big gap in between the angels and venture capital. Now, again, this is a bit of a commercial. Mars Innovation attempts to fill that gap for the organizations, for the companies that are spin-offs from our member organizations. We have only a modest amount of capital, but we are attempting to do something in that space. Regrettably, not very much, but it is something. We rely on organizations like HTX, like the Investment Accelerator Fund and others to actually help fill that gap between angels and institutional venture capital investors. So this indeed is a commercial. In fact, it's an advocacy commercial. I think I'm very much a free market person and feel that the government should stay out of our lives, except where it's convenient for them to do so. From my perspective, we would never have pulled this country together if the government had not built a railroad. And so I think there is a role at this point in time for government in terms of helping to move forward an early stage venture capital fund. There are precedents for this in Israel, which is well documented in a book that I'm sure many of you have read called Startup Nation. And Quebec has recently launched a number of funds that specifically do that. So what am I advocating? This is the commercial. If there are any people from government, our speaker at lunchtime said that the slides would be sent to deputy ministers. What we need is an early stage life sciences venture fund in Ontario that is composed of government, industry, and private sector equity all pulled together. That, and again, you can read those very clearly. The whole idea is to fill this gap, to provide I guess, cross the bridge, cross the chasm between angels and venture capital and the public markets. And so I'll leave you with one last slide, always trying to end with a bit of humor. The challenge in venture capital investing is to do the deal. Too often people go in and do their pitches, and this could be distributed later. The text is a little bit small, but It is very much a case of, well, we think we have something, and then when the investors start to do a little bit of digging, the case comes apart. So you need to be absolutely bulletproof and solid when you are making your pitch to investors, angels, venture capitals, or otherwise. Oops, wrong button. Thank you.